Good morning. This is Jennifer Wilkinson. I'm the Director of Alternative Education here at the State Department, and I am excited that you have joined us. And I am just going to briefly introduce, but he can give you the nuts and bolts of what he does and how he does it. But Phil Johnson from the Supreme Court is here to talk about PROS, which is a conflict resolution that would help us in our schools. And so I'm just going to go ahead and give it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and welcome everybody on this not so cold morning. It's always good to have the opportunity to share something that I'm very passionate about and have been with the Supreme Court now for a little over 20 years in working to resolve conflicts around the state of Oklahoma, not only in our courts, but also working with schools. And really and truly, this is my passion. I grew up in a home where my folks were teachers. And so the excitement that I would see, of course, not from the way that my folks lived, because we lived very modestly on our teacher's salary, but the excitement of seeing my folks for all of my life love to impact young people, love to touch young people's lives. Always impressed my sister. I have three other sisters who are actually in the classroom this morning. And so the passion about really giving back to education and being a part of education has always been something that's in my blood. And really and truly, the opportunity to be a part of a program through the Supreme Court is really an opportunity, in my opinion, to really share some of the wealth of information that we do have on ways of making our schools more peaceable. I'll never forget one of the first conversations that I had when I actually came up to the state capitol several years ago, was with the First Lady on the Supreme Court. A lady very short in stature, but very tall in the way that she stood out, Alma Wilson. And for anyone that knows Alma Wilson, she has a love for education as we see it in her academy here in Oklahoma City. But I had the opportunity to pick her up and take her on to a speaking engagement. And at that time, the justices were in the Capitol building. So when I pulled up, she was waiting at the door, and as she got in the door, it amazed me at what a wonderful memory that she had in her 80s. This was just a few months before her passing. But I'll remember that Justice Wilson reached over, kind of touched me on the arm, and she said, "Phil, I want to share something with you before I forget it." And I don't know if it's just me or when a justice speaks, but I think one of the things that I have always taken as, when somebody that has lived a really good life, that has a very knowledge and has a passion for people and a love for young people, tries to share something with you, I try to engage in that listening. And Justice Wilson said, as her eyes began to well up with tears, "Phil, whatever you do, continue with passion and vigor to share conflict resolution with our young people. Because you see, for my 50-plus years of being on the bench, I have taken a lot of young people before 18, and I've given them a second chance." And then she really began to weep. And she said, unfortunately, when they reach 18 and they make bad decisions, their life is changed forever in the future. And unfortunately, one of the things that I see in my 20 years of working in the courts is the fact that there are a lot of people who go through life and they can never get out of the cycle of conflict. And as you well know, a lot of the young people that are in our alternative schools come from a variety of backgrounds. And if there's something that we can do, something that you can do to change the scope of their future, the opportunity to break the cycle that they're in, and give them that one nugget of information or that one nugget of skill set to be able to move forward, then we've been a success, and you've been a success. I love education. Again, my background in education was for me to be a teacher, so this is a passion to be able to speak to you today. I'm originally from Holdenville, and so have the opportunity to travel all over the state, speaking to about 6,000 young people over the last 20 years in about 50 schools a year. But today I really want to focus on, and as I share that story about Justice Wilson, I want to move forward and really want to hopefully that you take something out of this next few minutes that we have together to share something that I'm passionate about. Is a tool that we actually train our adults with. So you're going to hear me before this presentation's over really encourage you to seek out a mediation program. We have a program called Early Settlement Mediation. We have regional offices all across the state. And I think as adults, many of you, wherever you're at in your career, at some point you wouldn't be working with young people if you didn't have that gift of communication, that gift of taking and working and listening through a conflict. You probably would be interested in training in the adult side of mediation, and I'd like to put you on a course to be able to do that. PROS, which stands for Peaceful Resolutions for Oklahoma Students, has been around for several years. I always said that prior to all of the testing and all the things that people are pulled into these days, it seemed like it was a lot easier to get the program going, get things rolling. But unfortunately, everybody has had a lot of plates spinning, and oftentimes programs like the PROS program get pushed to the wayside. But I think it doesn't diminish the fact that the program has a lot of merit, and it really is a great skill set for the young people of Oklahoma. The PowerPoint that you're going to see that I'm using today is actually something, because I can't be in every district, that I will email to you and make sure that you have. The good thing is that it actually has teaching notes built into the slides. So as you today participate really kind of in a train the trainer, you would be able to take this presentation and then apply it to your local campus and be able to use it. And then also we can offer other resources. I do try to do regional trainings every September, one in Oklahoma City and then one in Tulsa. And I'll make sure that Jennifer has the information to get out to you if you're interested in attending one of those events. And actually in that event you bring a couple of students, which is a really interesting dynamic. One of the things that in all of the training that I do, whether it be adult or working with young people, that I think is really important, that in most trainings people would say, do we really have to do introductions? And I think it's really important that folks learn that in an age where, unfortunately, we have, cell phones. Well, unfortunately, it makes my life a lot easier. But for young people, many times we know now that communication has been altered because of starting out with things like messaging and email, social media, but still continues to be the #1 way of communicating with our young people and growing even as adults is texting. And as we all know, that texting many times is a lot easier to be able to say something quickly, not have to kind of beat around the bush about other things or talk about things that don't relate to the subject. And so we can answer questions rather quickly, kind of the same way with email. But unfortunately, the typed word doesn't carry the same resonance of the spoken word. It's interesting. I also speak on a topic called dealing with difficult people. My sisters would say I'm the difficult person. But really and truly, one of the things that's interesting to me is when we think about communication, is we think that maybe a majority of communication would be the spoken word, when in reality, people's, their body language is really about 90+% of the communication process. And so with your students, many times they may not ever say a word, but the folded arms, the shrugged shoulders, the look, those things communicate so much without ever saying anything. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm trying to train a new group of young people is to, I really like to set them in a circular room where they're looking at each other. Now, there's something a little uncomfortable about, sometimes facing, a peer or being open in an open circle, but really and truly the value of everybody seeing everybody firsthand, it lends itself for people to build confidence in who they are. And so this opportunity to build this network or this team of people is really interesting, because when you build a group of people from all different walks of life, from all different backgrounds, all different races, then you build a really good overview of your particular school site. And what that does is that you're going to have a team with your peer mediators that are going to develop, at whatever level they are, life skills that are not going to be only for an immediate impact there at your school, but it's also going to be, as Justice Wilson said, a life skill that they can take with them the rest of their life and hopefully change the course of their life and give them some direction. So one of the things that I really like to do is talk about teamwork, and then we really get into what is conflict, what are the types of conflict, and really let them get involved in it, and then look at, and especially coming from the court system, what is the difference between court and mediation? What is the difference between a principal and mediation on a school level? And then really the crutch of our training and really the skill set that we as adults, but young people can take and will remember are the stages of mediation, and it's really just a blueprint or a map of exactly how the mediation process works. And then finally giving them an opportunity to role play. Now, the Oklahoma Bar Association has partnered with us for years through their law-related education. And as many of you know, they have gone a different direction now, and I don't have a direct contact there, but we do still have some materials that we're free to share. Also online, Jennifer, I'm not quite sure if that email address is out there, but we are a web address for the courts, which is www.oscn, which stands for Oklahoma State Court Network, oscn.net. If you will go to programs on the home page of our court system webpage and then click on alternative dispute resolution, you will see a tab that says pros. And it will actually have both the elementary version, which is intended for 4th graders up through 6th or 7th graders, and then it will have the high school version, which could be 6th, 7th, 8th, and up all the way through high school, and you're free to copy and print any of that information, including the role plays and cases that you could use for any training that you might want to do. So, again, one of the things that could be uncomfortable for young people is just that initial, even with friends, if it's their nature to not be very vocal or not to want to share a lot of information about who they are. This is just basic stuff to us adults, but to young people, this can be a little bit of a traumatic opportunity because, number one, does it make me look uncool? It also gives me a chance, it's going to put me in a situation to where that I'm not normally maybe vocal or whatever, but again, using the opportunity for them to put a circle around who they are, to share a little bit about who they are, gives everyone else from all different backgrounds in the group an opportunity to really look and get a greater feel for who they are. I will say it's interesting when you get down to the last question. Sometimes I have to warn them, be careful, reveal something about you that the rest of the group may know. It is amazing to me at young people and what sticks with them that is an impact in their life. For some of them, it could be as simple as a trip to an event in Oklahoma City, while others it may be a worldwide trip. But it's interesting what they share and what they value, and so you get a glimpse of who they are as they're going around the room. I really like Sean Covey. I like what he writes. I like the information he shares. We use some of his dad stuff when we talk about communicating with adults and really finding out what makes up the dynamics of your team. And so I like to use this out of his book, the seven Habits of Highly Effective Teens. And what it really describes is, and what I do at this point, is we know that everybody that has joined us for the training, or the students that you've selected or have signed up to be peer mediators, that they're going to sit by people they're comfortable with. And many times, again, they don't want to be singled out or to feel like, they like just going with the flow, that folks can judge them based on the surface, but we really never see the inside. And so at this point, what I really like to do is use this activity to have them draw a box or draw a circle around their self, not what the person on the left or the right thinks about them, but which one of these things really most identifies the skill set or the gift that they have. And the first one would be a plotter. And that would be the one that says, you know what, when I start something, I want to finish it. And a lot of times you're going to identify in your group, yes, this is somebody who maybe with all the strikes against them, they go above and beyond to try to make the best out of the situation, and they may struggle in their learning, that they really try hard. So they see in themselves as somebody who, if I start studying, or if I start an activity, or if I start my homework, then I'm going to finish it because I know that's what I need to do to succeed. You're going to see a whole lot of innovators. And I always say that an innovator is an outside-the-box, creative person. A lot of creative writers, a lot of people who are into art. This is going to be somebody who they wake up in maybe a new world every day. And I'm sure you guys know some of those folks. But really and truly, they maybe beat to a different drum. And so, that they bring that creative idea part to the group, that they could be somebody that could be real beneficial as you introduce mediation, that they could come up with some creative ways of doing that. I like to say the harmonizers are the feel the love people. These are going to be the people that they just don't like people to fight. They just want everybody to get along. They are like walking peacemakers. They want their friends to get along with other people, and so that's their mission in life, is to bring peace to everybody that they're around. Then we talk about follower, and I really emphasize that even though you go through and you hear most of your life that a follower is not something really good, that really in this term of follower, we're saying that you would be somebody that would say, I'm not necessarily somebody that could get up on the stage and lead. I'm a worker bee. I'm going to be a part of our team. I'm going to be a part of this mediation team. But really my gift is, making signs, or maybe coming up to support maybe an activity that we're going to do to make awareness of peer mediation. And I'm going to be a worker bee. I think many times that people don't want to admit that that's their gift, but really and truly, those can really be the people that make or break the mediation team, because if everybody wants to be the last one, and I've been accused of being that, show off, you know, you do need the show-offs, you do need the leaders, you do need the speakers, but really and truly, you need those worker bees out there, because then they're going to usually be the better listeners. I laugh and say that my ADD triple HD follows me everywhere that I go, that my mind continues to run all the time. But one of the things that I found with followers can be that a lot of times they hear things that I don't, because my listening skills, even this being my job and my role as the state director, I've learned to kind of hone those skills a lot better, but still it's not something that I do in my leadership role. And so it's really interesting that you will go around a room, and I really think this is true, is because, you know, we think that, okay, everybody should be the way that we think they should be, or maybe we have judged the book by the cover. And really and truly what you'll find is that you'll have one of each of these in your group. And I always say, wouldn't it be boring if everybody in this group was maybe a plotter? You know, plotter, 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 plotter. When really and truly, you know, when we think about it, we've got somebody over here that is a creative idea that can make, you know, can draw, can write. We have somebody over here that just wants everybody to get along. So we have a group of people that are all just a little bit different. And that's really the way that we are in the world around us, is that everybody brings a gift. And just because your gift is maybe not like the next person, that you remind yourself, this is the gift that you were given. And the opportunity to use that gift in a constructive, effective way. So when we think about what the type of conflicts are, as you look over this list, I'm sure that all these things come to mind, and that you do it not only as a school but maybe in individual classrooms. That really and truly, it just kind of dawned on me not long ago, as we were starting a new school year a couple of years ago, and I was speaking to an in-service group, is that really and truly the impact and the way that teachers and administrators have to deal with young people who go home in the summer, and they all go home to different environments. Some have structure and still continue to require that you have rules, and then some it's kind of a free-for-all and you can run and do whatever. And then all of a sudden in August, we gather all of these folks back up and try to make some meaning out of how are we going to get everybody to get along. Because your values at home aren't the same values that you have at school, that's going to definitely cause conflict, not just with you know, young people to young people, but certainly with the school, because the school's got a huge family of young people, and then that opportunity to set rules that everybody can follow, but yet still encourage them to bloom and to share the gifts that they have, and also be you know, to be effective. When we talk about limited freedom, we know that, again, you go right back to when they're maybe in a different environment in the evening. They go home. We know that many of them don't have a lot of supervision. And then at this point, it's, okay, my freedom is limited. And so, again, this can cause lots of conflict. You know, messing with your stuff or taking something that's not yours. Those are really two of the quickest ways for conflict to escalate really fast. One of the things that I have seen, and one of the things that I see in our courts that I work with all across the state, is that many times conflict will start out, and I guess now that we're in the winter time of the year, that I could describe it as maybe a small snowball. And so a conflict starts out, and we shape, and it's something that's just kind of the seed of starting up. And so maybe you go several weeks before a conflict explodes. And I'm very aware that as teachers, administrators, because of the huge family that you oversee, that many times you just take it as, well, they'll get along. It's not escalated to the point that we need to do something. But we know that sometimes that snowball can grow very rapidly, or it can stay small for a long, long time and then all of a sudden go and explode to the point of actually, maybe physical violence. Well, one of the things that we really have found with mediation, and I really want to make this clear early on, is I've had the opportunity over 20 years to speak to a lot of administrator groups and associations, a lot of preschool, pre-events prior to the school starting. And one of the questions I like to ask the principals is this question: principals, what is the number one problem at your school? Is it, weapons and violent acts that are the biggest concern? And even though that is a concern, it has never been the biggest concern. Okay, so principals, counselors, what is the biggest concern at your school? Is it drugs, alcohol, tobacco, substance abuse? Are those, and you'll hear the rumblings of, yes, that is a bigger problem, but it's not the number one problem at our school. And so let me ask you, what is the number one problem at your school? And so for me, over 20 years, the answer has always been the same. He said, she said, boyfriend, girlfriend, rumor, gossip, the things that start out very, very small, and many times by the end of the day, my mama's going to whip your mama, that type of thing, or starting out, as I described the snowball, very, very small, and over the course of time, things are said that cause that to increase. So if the number one problem at our schools is rumor, gossip, the things that we know can be dealt with quicker, but many times we don't have, then i.e. mediation is the perfect fit. Because at this point, if I'm a teacher and I'm teaching 55 minutes in a classroom every day, and I have two students who haven't really risen to the point of, kicking them out of the class, and they haven't had any, maybe loud verbal, outbursts, but I know they're not getting anything that I'm teaching, I know in my mind, just from knowing how mediation works, that I had rather send two young people to sit down and constructively talk about their situation with a neutral mediator before that escalates to a fight which can't be dealt with in mediation. And so that would be, when I hear people say, well, the only thing about mediation is it takes kids out of class. Well, I love that when people say that, because I've got a great answer back. Is if you tell me, administrators, or if you tell me, counselors, that a majority of your time is dealing with he said, she said, boyfriend, rumor, gossip, and if that could be dealt with in mediation and it could help you out, it really becomes a matter of relinquishing your authority and letting a skill set that really has proven to work be something that can be useful to your school. Now, when we look at the 5 stages, which we're fixing to glance at, one of the things that you're going to see is that students aren't trained to be counselors or to be principals as mediators. When I train adults, I just got through training a new group of adults, 19 adults who were community volunteers. One was a teacher, other were law students in adult form of how mediation works. Many of them came in with the idea, like some of our judges do, that a mediator listens to both sides, and then either, like a counselor, they give advice or they make decisions for people, much like an arbitrator. Matter of fact, when I return home at the local restaurant, a lot of folks will say, well, Judge Johnson, did you make decisions for somebody this week, or did you tell somebody what to do in your role in the work that you do? And it's amazing to me that people really don't fully understand what mediation is. I kind of chuckle a little bit every time I say that, because I'll never forget walking across the campus back in 1996. I had sidetracked out of education, was the youngest motor license. Anybody needs mediation, it's motor license agent in the state. And then went into business for 7 years. And one day woke up and said, this is not my gift. This is not where I need to be. I need to be in education. And so I returned to East Central. And I was walking across, and as many times happens in the moment, I was walking across the campus and ran into the Dean of Education, graduate education, Jack Paschal, for many in education circles know. And only Dr. Paschal, who I hadn't seen for maybe 15 years, looks up and says, Phil Johnson. And it amazes me how he remembers that. And in the course of that, he says, we have this program on campus that needs a director. And I could have sworn that Dr. Paschal said, Phil, the program is meditation. And I looked at him like the most puzzled look and said, you've got to be kidding me. You know, we sit around and hum and all of that. And little did I know that now 20 years later and as the state director, that it would become my passion that I learn not the meditation process, but the mediation peacemaking process. The one thing I want to caution folks is because we know that so much of what we see today is bullying. And I always give a precursor that mediation is not a substitute for dealing with bullying. Mediation is a preventive tool that will keep, hopefully, a school environment from young people resorting to bullying because they know that it is not acceptable. And so that definitely would have to be handled, you know, by the counselor. So as you look through this list of things that could be conflicts at your school, every one of them, I'm sure, jumps out in various ways. One of the things that I really like to use, especially with young people, and I think this is interesting, let you guys do it too. Don't know if you've seen this. But if you look at this, and I like to show it for about 15 seconds, and then I'll jump back maybe a slide. So you had a chance to kind of glance at the squares. And so the question is, how many squares do you see? So as they glanced at the squares, in their mind, they're probably like me, or I hope they're a little more depth than I was, but I saw this several years ago. And one of the things that I thought was, this is the craziest thing I've ever seen. It's fairly obvious that there are 16 squares when I look at this picture. And, you know, I learned my math, 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4, 16, or 4 times 4. My multiplication chart is 16. And so, you know, the majority of the group in my group, when I first saw it, said, well, this is easy. There's 16. And then somebody said 17, and I thought they were weird. So I know that probably as you look at the slide, you're thinking, well, that's not really a square, but for the purposes of the slide, it is a square, that the outside square would be the 17th square. In the 6,000 young people that I've probably shown this to over the last 20 years, there's only been 2 young people that got the correct answer on this. One was an 11th grade young lady, and I was speaking up northeastern Oklahoma, and unfortunately I couldn't get to her to visit with her about what she saw before she left. But the other was more recent. In the last 5 years, a 7th grade young man came up with the correct answer. So let's look at it together. Maybe have got your interest a little bit in this. Is that we know there's 16 squares because that's the obvious, and then the 17th is the square around. But as we began to look further in depth, and we look at the 4 squares in the upper corner, and then we go to the right of that, there's 4 more squares. So there's 18, 19, and then there's 4 more squares on that top row, 20. And then we move to the middle, and there's 4 squares, 4 squares, 4 squares, 4 squares, 4 squares, 4 squares. And then as we look even a bit further, if we go 3 squares down and 3 squares over, in each one of the corners it adds another set of squares where there is a total of 30 squares. I felt totally ignorant. How did I not see that? So I have a 7th grade young man, and I look at him, and I say, how in the world did you see 30 squares? First of all, have you seen this before? And he said, no, sir, I haven't. And I said, so tell me, how would you describe that you saw, or why did you see, or how did you see 30 squares when I saw 16? And I really like the answer that he gave. He said, sir, it's because I looked beyond the surface. And I think that's something that we can go back to judging a book by its covers, is that so many times we are so guilty of judging someone by what we see on the outside that we fail to really explore and find what's on the inside. So for the folks that saw 16, or maybe someone else saw 17, or 21, 23, 24, you're not wrong. It's just that there was actually more if you looked a little more in depth. And so my point on this slide is really encouraging them to understand that just because maybe, and I like to describe it with blinders on, that many times it's my way or the highway, that everybody's got to see things my way. I'm sure there's none of you out there that have that. I catch myself thinking that it's my way or the highway. But really and truly, as mediators, as peacemakers, and the gift that we have is to peel those blinders back so that we look at the complete picture with an open mind. And I think that's so vitally important. So we've given them an opportunity as we train and we talk about you've opened up, you've warmed up. When you train young people, and again, I'll be willing to help you any way that I can. When you train young people, that you try to do this out of maybe the normal system of where they're disrupted, that you could do it in a quiet setting. And I know for many of you, there's no quiet settings at your school. But if you can find that, it's really good, because this particular 3 to 4 hour training that the students would do really gives them an opportunity to bond, and gives them an opportunity to really grow as a team. So when we look at and we talk about how people respond to conflict, we really find there's 4 different ways, or we describe 4 different ways. Let me ask you this question. And this is not a macho thing or something to be embarrassed about, but I want you to think to yourself, if you're involved with a conflict with someone, would you say A, that you tend to be an avoider, or B, that you're an approacher? I've got my hand up on B. Or actually A. I am an avoider. And somebody says, well, how can you be in your role and be an avoider? I'm not comfortable with conflict. It's kind of like the idea that if you walk down the hall and you see somebody that you're in conflict with, that you go, oh, I don't want to go that way, I want to turn. Oh, there they are again, so I want to get away. And you think that time will heal that particular problem. And that's something that you really got to watch. Because if society, and we've learned in Oklahoma that most people are avoiders, out of sight, out of mind. If I don't deal with it, then I don't have to talk about it. So we say, okay, they withdraw. Others would be, again, approachers. I laughed this last fall. I spoke up in Broken Arrow at an upper elementary school, and had a young lady. We trained from 4th grade, up, really where the skills, cognitive skills began, and that they could hold the reasoning skills to be able to be mediators. And we were at a break. I was visiting with the principal, and this young lady walked over with, and I noticed that she kind of a little snaggle tooth, and so she had a little bit of a lisp when she talked. And, you know, I'm sitting there visiting with the principal. They're supposed to be taking a break, and she's pulling on my pocket, and she's saying, Mr. Mediator, you know, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm talking to your principal, and she pulls on my pocket, and I'll kind of look, and I back up, and I said, you know, what, young lady, what is it? And she said, you know, when you asked that question of whether that we were avoiders or approachers, and I said, well, I know what you are, and I said, laughed, and I said, no, I said, tell me. And I love this answer because I think this is the way we are as people. She said, well, it depends on how big the other person is. Whoa, my bad. You're good, my bad. Let's think about it. That really is the fear factor figures into it. And so a lot of people, because of that fear factor, they give in or they do avoid. They never approach the problem. Now, when we talk about acting out, I don't want to single out our female friends, but really for women, sometimes it can be a lot of drama. For young girls, it can be a lot of drama. When you drop, you know, excitement or you create excitement, the drama queens, as they will, can cause a lot of conflict in different ways. They can pop in and out of situations and kind of get people all riled up. In the same way that I guess guys could do the very same thing in maybe with competition. And then the final thing that we look at is we talk about is mediation and how that mediation might be the perfect fit for that particular situation. So as we dive into mediation and we talk about mediation, you'll notice on the bottom of this strip there's actually a link. Several years back, I spoke over at Dibble Schools, which is just south of the metro. And their principal was really creative, but he put together a school tube video about their mediation program. So at some point, again, you may want to as you get this PowerPoint, you may want to look at that little video and how they use it to promote mediation at their school. So and again, of course, being from the court system, I like to use court as an example, because when I'm working with people, and I've done about we mainly, in our program, unfortunately, Oklahoma, 3 out of every 5 marriages ends in divorce. You heard me right. 3 out of every 5 marriages ends in divorce. We're either number 2 or 3 in the nation in divorce. And so, unfortunately, mediation is a huge demand in Oklahoma. And so, as adults, we provide this service through our courts. The forward thinking of having it available is amazing, because people have this opportunity at no cost to utilize the mediation process. And what I tell people very simply is that you can go in and you can be very self-assured that you are going to have, you're going to win on everything if you go in before a judge. But I can tell you that as being someone that's been before a judge, that you at that point lose all of your power to be able to make a decision. So let's equate that to school and a principal. Is that you go in and you think, I'm right 100%, but we know if 2 students go into a principal, and the principal, I always like to say it's kind of like the bobblehead dog in the car. When the car stops, it stops, and then it stops, and the bobblehead starts going, yeah, and you see it bouncing around. In the same way, young people, as a principal's trying to give instructions about what you'll do and what you won't do, and you're yeah. And then if you notice, many times the young people will walk out and walk around the corner and basically say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to, because again, it was instruction given. We'll just do what we have to do to survive, but it wasn't our idea. The beauty of mediation is the fact that it makes people look internal to find some resolution to the problem they're in. So you have a choice. And this is the greatest in my skill set of doing about 2,000 family cases, about 1,000 family cases and about 2,000 small claims cases. One of the things that I say is this: When I'm in the 11th hour and both parties are very positional and they don't want to come up with a resolution, they're very polarized, they're very stubborn, they see things my way, one way. One of the things that I have learned as a lever is, do you really want to give all of the power of your situation to someone and let them decide your future? Because that's what you're fixing to do. And maybe for the first time it begins to create doubt whether or not they're actually going to prevail. You know, somebody told me one time there's three answers to a problem, or three ways of addressing a problem, or three right ways or wrong ways. So when we think about it, it's either, we have each party's side of the story, and then we have the truth, the third way. And I think that's the way it is, because we are so polarized into thinking that it's our way that we don't want to peel back the blinders and realize that maybe we're both at fault. So what we're really trying to do at this point is create in the mind that if we could use these in school settings, if we could use these 10 to 15-minute mediations where that peers who are specifically trained, and the State Department, other Education Foundation, Administrators Association all support the use of mediation, where that students in a setting would sit down with a peer, and basically the peer is not going to give advice, not going to share information about how to solve it, but they're going to explain to them, if we resolve it here, you have a greater opportunity to get what you might want, or at least a portion of it. I like to tell this story because I think it really does put into perspective what mediation can do. About, 10 years ago, I was speaking at a school not far here from the metro, and it was a middle school. And I was actually a junior high, because they had a 9th grade. I was training a group of 9th grade students, and they actually had 20 students in this training to become peer mediators. And generally what I do, there's a role play, and again, the materials will give you the role play, but I'll find 2 young people at the break to act out the role play. And so on this particular day, one young man stood out. His name was Scott. He had shared with the group, kind of listening in the opening, that he was a football player, kind of the student council president, pretty much all around popular. Everybody seemed to like him. And then when I went to look for my girl, I couldn't quite find anybody. It seems that as though that there was one young lady, and so her name was Julie, and she was a little hesitant to do it, but I explained to her that it would be fine. I would work with her, that it was just a role play, and she agreed reluctantly to go ahead and to do that. And so on this particular day, the role play was going to be that Scott and his buddies had early morning practice, and when they came into the school, they'd walk down the hall. They wouldn't pay attention where they were going. Julie and her friends would have their book bags, and they'd be talking and not really paying attention either. Scott and his friends would pass them by in the hall, and for several weeks now, they had bumped them. The book bags had fallen on the floor. Books and everything in their bags had gone everywhere. And so it came to the point to where that on this particular day, Julie jumps up, she screams at Scott and says, "Why don't you watch where you're going?" And he says, "Why don't you and your friends get out of the middle of the hallway?" And so we have a conflict, and a teacher recommends that they try mediation. So that was the role play, and the 2 of them, we staged that. We sat down across from each other. Again, that can be a real uncomfortable situation in a real setting. And as you can imagine, in a divorce case where I have 2 folks maybe that have been married for 40+ years, sitting 4 feet apart, and there's a lot of hurt. Well, in the same situation with young people, if they're sitting across from each other in a neutral setting, that can be a very uncomfortable situation. But what we find is it can be a very healing situation as well. So in this particular situation, Julie was sitting on one side, Scott sitting on the other. And so I just kind of began, and you'll see here in a minute as I share the script, or share the stages, that I asked Scott to tell me what exactly brings you here today. And Julie, I'm going to have you help me listen. And so Scott begins to explain that his buddies walking down the hall, they're hot and sweaty from sports. They kind of, own the hall because they're the popular group. And they walk down the hall, Julie and her friends kind of, talking, not really paying attention. And so when they step in our way, we bump them. Their book bag goes everywhere. And, we can't help it if they're not paying attention. So we, again, have that conflict. About that time, I kind of glance over and look back at Julie, and I notice that she's pale, and I'm thinking, okay, she's getting a little bit worried about the situation. And so one of the things that I notice is that she's beginning to kind of tear up. And so I'm thinking she's sick. And I stopped just a second, kind of out of character, acting as the mediator. And I said, Julie, do we need to take a break? And she said, no, sir, that'll be fine. So I let Scott finish. And one of the things that we do as mediators is we repeat back exactly what they've said for clarity, using that communication listening skill set. And then as I turned to Julie, she looked up, and I'll never forget the most defeated look and tears welling up in her eyes. And again, I said, do we need to take a break? This is, the role play. Do we need to take a break? Or, maybe she's a really good actress or whatever. And I'll never forget when the first teardrop ran down her cheek. And she said, Mr. Johnson, I know this is supposed to be a role play. But she said, Scott, please don't be mad at me. Scott and I have been friends since we went to kindergarten together. And we've known one another. But for the last 3 years in junior high, Scott has excelled as football player, has excelled in being the student council president, and he's a leader. And of course, at that point, Scott's kind of looking at her like, "What are you talking about? What's the deal?" And then the tears began to flow. And she said, "Scott, when you come down the hall and you stop and you look at me, and when you say, 'What are you wearing? What is that? What kind of clothes are those?' When you look at my hair and you say, 'What'd you do to your hair? What happened to your face?' When you say those things, you're hurting me on the inside." Now again, there were 20 young people in that room. And here's Scott, their leader. Julie's saying things about Scott. Scott's in shock. My grandmother used to use a phrase, maybe, I don't know, just because it was me, is silence is golden. But you could have heard a pin drop that day. And she said, "Scott, I don't want you to say those things anymore. Because when you say those things, you're hurting me on the inside, and I don't want to hurt." There's a lot of Scott and Julies at every single school. And having the opportunity or having the forum for them to have an opportunity to work out things in a peaceable way is so vitally important. So the 5 stages that we use are very simple. And I like to say that it's something that we use as adults, but we make it as simple that young people down to beginning in 4th grade could use. So if we look at, in the same way that we started the training by them introducing each other to be the mediators for the team, when we get into mediation, generally what this is going to be is there's going to be a way at each school for people to recommend that people go to mediation. It can be student recommendation, it can be teacher recommendation, but it's a privilege to get to go to mediation. We don't use it as something or don't take it lightly. Because in mediation, number one, we're going to use co-mediators. Generally, if it's a boy and a girl in the situation, we would try to use a boy and a girl in the mediator roles. If it's two males, then we may use 2 males or a male and a female. and kind of the same thing with if it were a female situation with the disputants. And so they're sitting about 4 feet apart from one another. Again, remember that these are problems that haven't resulted in the punch being thrown. We know those have to be handled by the principal. And we actually have a script that they use, that they follow. But really, again, the role of a peer mediator is to take off the situation they're in, whatever they're doing, find them, whether as counselor aid or there's a maybe a particular part of the day that they have available that is not maybe a core subject that they could mediate for 15 minutes. But they go in, they sit down, and they are not going to make decisions for people. They're going to be listening. And so this very first part of mediation is really key because it builds rapport. And that is a huge key. I see that with adults, is that if I start out by making people feel comfortable with me as the mediator, then people have a greater opportunity to be able to, to feel like that they're in a safe zone to be able to talk. And so we train the young people to be able to do that. It's like the first day of school. We give the expectations of what we expect in mediation, but there's also a few rules. One, speak at a time while the other one listens. Please remain seated. No one can stand up. We ask the other one to help us listen because it invites them into the listening process. And again, from start to finish, most mediations last 15 minutes. Now, with adults, of course, we know in family situations, many of those can last 3 and 4 hours or maybe even multiple sessions. With small claims, they're usually 45 minutes, single issue type things. But with young people, they're resilient that when they get there, there's usually one issue or it all revolves around an issue, and they're able to talk about it openly, and generally they begin to free flow. And so in about 15 minutes, they have an opportunity to work through the problem and come up with a resolution. So this initial explaining what it is. Remember that the two parties that come into mediation, I tell our mediators this because they're like going, but if we mess up on the script or if we don't do it right, and I said, they're never going to know that you did it wrong because they don't know what mediation is. You're explaining to them a process. So they're living with their problem, and you're wanting to be genuine, the real deal, and be that good listener. So stage 2 is really where you have both parties at the starting gates, and they're both wanting, as you think about yourself when you have a problem, you can't wait. Maybe sometimes you put it off and you don't want to talk about it, but there's going to be that certain person that asks you, what's going on? And I mean, as soon as it's the right time, you are going to be, I like to describe it as a helium balloon. And you're untying the stem by saying what's going on, and they begin to open up and share. And remember that the person that has offended them or they're in conflict with is 4 feet apart. So it's not somebody running back and forth. It's that you hear it firsthand. You see it firsthand. You see the body language. You see the frustration. You see the hurt. And you hear it firsthand. So when we get to telling the story, really what we try to do as mediators, as peacemakers, is it's interesting because a lot of my law students will say, well, this is easy. Man, we need to go through this really, really quick because we just need the facts. And I said, no, take off your law school way of thinking or take off your judgmental way of thinking. Or I have volunteers, adult volunteers who are lawyers. I have people that are counselors, and they have to take off those hats to step into this role of being this neutral peacemaker. So what they do is by actively listening, and I say that our eyes tell us a lot about a situation. Your eyes tell me if you're happy. They tell me if you're sad, if you're mad, if you're glad. Your eyes tell me about your heart many times. So as we're listening, as we position ourselves to listen, as young people learn, we all know, just as in this webinar, hopefully I haven't lost all of you, but just in this webinar, that if we don't change gears about every 10 to 12 minutes, then people begin to fall off and think about something else because that's just how the human mind works. But at this point, it's the very single most important thing of mediation. And that is that we listen as a reflective mirror. I like, my grandmother, again, had many sayings, but one that she said would say to me is, a mirror never lies. What you see in a mirror is the true reflection. The best description of mediation is that as mediators, we're a true reflection. I recently had a judge that said, Phil, why don't you just, you've done this for 20 years, you've done a lot of cases, why don't you just share or tell people what to do? And I said, very respectfully, Your Honor, you wear the black robe, and in my role, I empower people. Do I say that many times I could probably give them some great life advice because of my skill set? Absolutely. But I remind myself every time, I remind the young people that train as mediators, I remind our volunteer mediators that when we step across the line and we're not that true reflection, then we're not being that, pure mediator model. We're giving advice, and that's not what we want to do. 3 things that we like to use, I'll never forget when I first saw the 3 Ps, the pause, the praise, the purpose. The trainer at the time said that he first thought that meant pant, panic, and punt. Because many times you'll get in these situations as a mediator and they'll tell information and you'll get a little bit stumped. And because, again, you do have to have those active listening skills, we do use the 3 Ps. The first is pause. You've heard the saying, silence is golden. It's always odd to me when the electricity goes out and things get really, really quiet. And I'm somebody that, again, has something going on all the time, so it's like, okay, so I've had enough of that. Let's go back to the buzzing of the lights and the fans. But really and truly, when we let our mind catch up with our mouth many times, is where the real thinking, critical thinking happens. The praise is something that we all, regardless of the situation we're in, when somebody says, you're doing a great job, I'm sure we're going to be able to resolve this. Thanks for participating. Anytime that you're positive, you usually get a response back, and it makes people want to work harder to be able to come up with a resolution. So, when we talk about the purpose, the final P of our 3 Ps is that basically that we remind them that as peer mediators, we're not here to give legal advice. We're not involved in the problem. We're going to keep this confidential. And that basically our role is to see if you all can work this out amongst yourselves, because if you do, then you won't have to go into to the principal and, basically we'll write up an agreement here and you had all of the power to settle this. And I think really that's a key to when I get into situations. I've done as much as a $30 million lawsuit as a mediator, and I will say that most of the cases that I do, people don't have a pot or a window to throw it out of them. I guess that's the saying. But really and truly, when people, as positional as they are, even young people, it's when it comes down to the final, that their bark is louder than their bite, that really and truly slowing down the process and taking a minute to listen and to feel like they've been heard is a whole lot of the healing process. And as many of you know, a lot of what young people bring to school is the baggage from home. And so I know that we have to go above and beyond to be empathetic to their particular situation. I always thought this was an interesting statistic. I learned this back when I was going through training at East Central, that if we think about from birth to 18 years, what impact does an educator have on a young person? And immediately, the quick response is that you think that you have at least 75% of their life. I've had some that says, you don't understand. When I have this kid one day, it seems like that I'm 95% of their life because I have to put up with them or manage their behavior. But it's interesting to me that if we look at that statistic from birth to age 18, that actually a teacher only has the opportunity of about 16% of that child's life. But most young people will tell you that in that 16%, that a teacher's influence was as impactful or more impactful than their parents' influence. So the role, again, that's being led by teachers, and the role that these young mediators, we need to remember that they have an impactful role of showing them how you listen. The cool thing about mediation is that we're patient. We let them fully explain what the issue is. If there's some side issues, we want to get everything resolved, because when people, again, as using the balloon as the analogy, when they breathe, they let everything out, many times that's the opportunity to heal and forgive. The next stage is putting yourself in the other person's position. I think that's really tough for us to do because we're really selfish. We don't want to think about if we had to be in someone else's position. But really and truly, this is a point where that we take a minute, we use the 3 Ps, take a deep breath. Now, take the situation you're in and put yourself in the other party's position. How would you feel? I think as adults, that's really difficult for us too. But I think for the first time, maybe young people in their critical thinking could separate what they're going through and really put some thought into, you know what, I could do this, this, and this to make this person's life so much easier. And I think that's important that we do that. So this third stage is putting yourself in the other person's position. And then when we look at basically throwing out there, how are you going to solve this? Let's brainstorm. I, as the mediator, I can't come up with ideas. If you want to go to a principal is going to come up with a lot of ideas, and probably it's going to be that both of you are in trouble, both of you are wrong, both of you are punished. But in mediation, what we're doing is we're putting the opportunity to critically think about what could I come up with that would be an option that I could live with. Now, I may not get 100% of what I want, but I really risk getting nothing. What can I come up with? And this is the neat thing about mediation, is that it's an opportunity to realize that you can be the crafter of finality to the situation and that you are the one that came up with the idea. What we found is that people come up with their own ideas, they will live with them. If someone else, like a judge or a principal, tells them they're going to do something, they'll reluctantly maybe try to survive, but they still don't, again, feel like that they've had input. And so when they have input, and that's what they're going to have in peer mediation, over this 15 or so minutes is an opportunity to resolve the conflict. Finally, we encourage them to write the agreement down, basically put everything that they've agreed to in writing, make it realistic, put all of the, in real simple language of what everybody's responsibility is, and then either the counselor or the person supervising the peer mediators would step in and would read over it, and then everybody signs it. Basically, I'm giving my word that I will follow it. In a study that we did several years ago, we found that 9 out of 10 mediations, or 90%, are actually resolved in mediation. Pretty phenomenal. To put it into terms of maybe court system, I've been up here in the Oklahoma City area for a little over 10 years. We're in a huge populated area, and our courts are, sometimes 9-10 months before you can get on a docket. In the 10 years, we've been able to take those cases that are really pushed back and move them from being, 9 months out to moving them up to 6 weeks. Because if you think about it, in the same way at a school, if we can resolve 9 out of every 10 conflicts, then you're taking 9 out of 10 of the conflicts that the counselor or the principal was dealing with in the same way with a judge. It just expedites. What a lot of people don't realize is that overall, the win-win for everybody is that when people experience mediation, even as a participant, the skill set that they take with them is something that will last for life. And so they're really going to maybe take that skill set and keep it, hold on to it, and realize that in the future, if there's problems, that it's best to communicate, to think before throwing the punch, to think before making a bad decision, to show and demonstrate to others that making good decisions is important. What I've seen, what we've seen, what's been reported to me is an increase of school pride, a greater opportunity for students' attendance and to be engaged in school because it's not acceptable for there to be bullying. It's not acceptable for people to talk down to other people. Everybody feels like, and especially your peer mediators, that's what I like. The beauty of this is so many times we always pick the up and outers. Part of the selection of mediators is getting a really good overall picture of your school, of your class, of your grade, whatever you're going to use this for, that you get a great opportunity for the kid that doesn't identify with anything else, and mediation becomes their passion. And so as I go back and as I kind of close today, I think about Justice Wilson. And at the end of her speech and driving her back to the Capitol and letting her out, just a few months later, she passed away. But the impact that she had on me that day, just in the words of encouragement, of with all of your passion, share with our young people and give them the skills to be successful in life. And I think as we model or try to model as adults how to live lives without conflict, as we give them this tool set, even though we selfishly want to improve our school climate, we're going to do what Justice Wilson asked. We are going to put a foundation in their life to springboard them to the future. So as you reflect that we know you don't teach for the money, we know you don't teach for sometimes the criticism, that really and truly it's because you want to or have the opportunity to impact a life. On behalf of the Supreme Court of Oklahoma, the highest court, the justices, we feel like that if we train young people on the front end, then they won't be walking the halls when they reach 18 in the decisions that they make. So my goal, my passion in life is to really make sure that we train as many young people as we possibly can in these mediation skills. I will be glad to help you, assist you any way that I can. My schedule becomes a little limited as far as individual schools, but there are ways that we can help you achieve getting some people trained. I will tell you that there's a lot of times that there's going to be naysayers that say it can't be done, but I believe that if you really set your mind and that people have a passion for really, again, equipping young people with these skills, that it can be done. I'm sure Jennifer can share with you additional information. I know we had somebody asking about the PowerPoint. I'll freely share that with you. Let me give you my email address. It is Phil, Phil.Johnson, Phil.Johnson at oscn.net, oscn.net, Phil.Johnson, oscn.net, and I will be glad to send you information, but I'll also be glad to correspond with you and work with you in getting an effective program going. Thanks so much for having me here today. Thank you, Gary.
Let's see. We do have just a minute or two here for questions. If anybody has a question out there, if you'll please put it in the chat box. and we can look at it. I think that was, you're right, I think that was about the only question I had seen so far.
She's the one that we lost in the middle. Was there any to know her? We lost one somewhere in there.
I don't know about that for sure. Okay, I'm not seeing anything else, so thank you everybody for attending today. We appreciate it.